Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tom's Gadget Garage. Today I am here with the Ausom L2 Max dual motor version. We're going to see just how much range we can squeeze out of this scooter. Now Ausom does claim you can get up to 56 miles of theoretical range, but keep in mind that's based off of a rider weighing 145 pounds. For this ride today I do weigh in at approximately 200 pounds, so we'll see just how far this thing can get us today. Now in terms of the settings that I'm using on this scooter today, I do have our acceleration strength set to 2 out of 5, which I find to be most comfortable on these longer rides. And I've also got our electronic braking strength set to 3 out of 5, so pretty middle of the road settings. And I will be tracking this ride there with Garmin GPS, which I find to be the most accurate and consistent way to track these rides. That way we can compare the results to some of the scooter's competitors. Now this scooter does have suspension. It's got a coil spring in the rear as well as a coil spring in the front, both of which have rubber dampening, which makes for a nice quiet operation of the suspension on this scooter. As you can see, we're on hard packed dirt, and this thing does a really good job of absorbing a lot of the bumps in the road. What I like about rubber dampening is it makes for a nice quiet operation. Sometimes scooters with straight coil springs don't have a very good dampening, and they make clunking sounds when you go over bumps in the road, and I'm really not a fan of that. I think suspensions on scooters should be near silent. It makes for a much better riding experience. The trail that we're going on today is the Powerline Trail, so it's going to have us going on about 70% paved surface, 30% hard packed dirt, so give us a good idea of how this scooter performs on varied terrain. In terms of the battery, which is going to be important for our range today, this is a 48 volt scooter. It does have a 20.8 amp hour battery, which is good for 998 watt hours of capacity. So very similar to what we have on the original Ausom Leopard. I think it's the same battery they use in that scooter, and slightly smaller than what we find in the original Ausom Gallop. On the Ausom Leopard, I believe I got about 35 miles of range. The Gallop was around 32 miles of range. So we'll see how we do compared to those scooters, and then we'll benchmark against some other scooters, some direct competitors, some more commuter scooters. In case I didn't mention it, we are cruising around in sport mode. This scooter does have 3 primary drive modes, which are going to be Eco with a top speed of 18 miles an hour, Sport at 28 miles an hour, and Race mode, which, in theory takes you up to 40 miles an hour, although I have not been able to attain those speeds on this scooter yet. If you are curious about the performance of this scooter, I did do top speed and acceleration test, as well as some, smaller hill climbs in my first impressions video, as well as feature overview, so I'll definitely include a link to that below. We also took this out on our extreme hill climb test, which takes this scooter up a grade over 23%. So if you want to check those out, I will include links in the description below. Whenever I do my range tests on these scooters, I usually mark my turnaround point right around 65% battery remaining, and I can gauge that pretty well using the voltage on the scooter. And that's one of the things that I really like about Ausom scooters is they include a voltage readout. And there's a lot of scooters that don't, and you're basically relying on what are usually highly unreliable battery bars. And so voltage readout in 2025 is absolute must. There's no excuse not to have that. So on a full charge, this scooter sits around 54.4 to 54.6 volts. So 65% remaining means our turnaround point is going to be right around 49 to 49.5 volts. So once we get to that point, we'll head on back. That way we have enough juice in the tank to make it back to our starting point, because I'll tell you right now, pushing scooters absolutely sucks. Something to keep in mind with electric scooters, electric bikes, things like that, is that the first half of the battery is usually a lot more performant than the second half of the battery. And so as you run the battery down over longer ranges, you get less voltage, which ultimately means less output from the motor, so you can have slower top speed, slower acceleration, and you're just not going to get the same performance. So, if you turn around at the 50% mark, you're absolutely not going to make it back to your destination unless the return trip is downhill. Other than that, you're going to be doing some walking. All right, so up ahead is our pedestrian bridge. It's a little hill climb for us. Nothing too crazy. We are in sport mode, and let's see, torque acceleration setting set to 2 out of 5, so nowhere near maximum. But anyways, let's head on up this. Throttle's all the way in, and as you can see, we are accelerating up this thing, so plenty of juice, even at 2 out of 5 on the acceleration strength. Now on the downside here, we'll be able to test out the brakes. This scooter does come equipped with 140mm discs in the front as well as the rear. It's also got electronic braking in both motors, which definitely helps out. But, you know, no issues at all whatsoever so far with these brakes, aside from the fact that they are a little squeaky. I did ride this around in some dirt areas, and sometimes those discs get dirty and squeak, so I'll probably take some brake clean to those later on. But that is one thing I noticed putting the miles on this scooter, is that there are cases where you get, you know, kind of some squeaks out of the brakes. All right, folks, so for all of you keeping track, we just crossed the 6-mile mark. Voltage under no load 51.4. So we'll see how we do. You know, with this scooter, you do have the option to cruise around both in dual motor mode or single motor mode. Of course, for today's ride, we are in dual motor because it is a dual motor scooter. And if you're going to buy a dual motor scooter, I highly recommend riding it around in dual motor mode. Live life to the fullest. The beautiful thing about this L2 Max is the fact that it's $899, which so far I think is an absolute steal of a deal. I don't know how they do it. You know, there's a lot of scooters in the $899 territory that if you look at what you get, it's like, you know, that's not a whole lot when you stack it up against a scooter like this. Now, getting back to the brakes for a second, this scooter does have cable actuated brakes. These are manual brakes. They are not hydraulic, you know, and for a scooter over 70 pounds, normally you'd expect to see hydraulic brakes, and so that's why I do our little brake test and a first impressions ride. And I'm happy to report back that the brakes on this scooter are more than sufficient for your everyday riding. And if you do need more braking power, you can always dial up the electronic brakes, but I found, you know, electronic braking set to level 3 is, I think, more than sufficient for the kind of riding that most people are going to be doing. All right, so we got some train tracks here, no train here. Okay, pretty comfortable going over that. As you can see, we're cruising around at a very comfortable speed right now. Suspension's doing a good job of absorbing a lot of these cracks in this bike path. You know, they've got the gaps between each of these concrete sections, and you can hardly feel those on this scooter. Now, one thing that I think is important to call out is that Ausom has changed the tires that they use on these newer scooters. Normally they use, you know, a more aggressive hybrid tire. And these two are hybrid tires, but they're a lot quieter, they're a lot smoother, and I think they're a huge improvement over the ones that they use on the Gallop and the original Leopard. In the coming weeks, I will be doing our endurance hill climb test, which should have us going up 17.5 miles of windy mountain roads. And that'll give us an idea not only of the hill climb performance of this scooter over longer distances, but also how it does with battery consumption under load. Especially when you factor in that, you know, it's almost 9.5 miles of nearly continuous incline to get to all 3 lookout points on that mountain. So stay tuned. I'll be doing that test here in the coming week, so it should be a fun one. Now, for all of you keeping track, we just crossed the 10-mile mark. If I pull my finger off the throttle here, I'm showing about 49.7 volts. So we are eating through this battery. We're also riding around at higher speeds than I normally would on a commuter scooter. So we'll see. So what I'll do is I will mark our turnaround point right around 49 volts. Should give us enough power to make it back without issue. And if it turns out that we still have, you know, a bunch of battery remaining in the tank, we can always take little detours and work this battery down to 0. Looking at our battery bars, I see 4 out of 5 remaining. And so that's one thing to keep in mind with a lot of these scooters. Sometimes those battery bars aren't the most accurate things in the world. So, you know, really happy to see the voltage readout here. To give you an idea of our cruising speed right now, we're at about 23 miles an hour. So we're maintaining slightly higher speeds than we would on our regular commuter scooters. All right, folks, so we are right around 49 volts. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull over to the side here. We'll take a quick break and we'll start heading back to where we started. There's our Ausom L2 Max, looking fabulous. We're currently at about the 12-mile mark, right around there. And so, you know, if we turn back and do exactly what we did to this point, we should end up at about 24 miles. I think we're gonna be able to squeeze out more than that, but I like to play it safe because I personally don't like pushing scooters for miles upon miles, you know, and I've got to get home. My wife's got to go to work today, so I got to get home before she leaves. But anyways, look at that. We got fish, lots of fish. I've never seen this many fish in this part of the canal before. I don't know if you can see it on screen, but anyways, I'm going to get some water and we're going to continue on our range test with this L2 Max. All right, we are on our way. So right now we're cruising around at about 24, 25 miles an hour. And one thing to mention about this scooter is the fact that it does have a notch in the steering. It is very subtle, but it is just enough to make the straight line performance on this scooter fantastic. You know, even when I did my top speed and acceleration test, at no point did I even get a hint of speed wobbles. Which if you've experienced those, you already know, but if you haven't, speed wobbles are an absolute nightmare and one of your worst case scenarios when riding a scooter, other than, you know, slipping out on some gravel or plowing into a pothole. You know, speed wobbles are a dangerous thing and in an instant can throw you off a scooter, and so I'm happy that this L2 Max is very stable, even at speed, and we can attribute that to some of that notch design that they have in the front. For some benchmarks that we're going to be looking at today for scooters that I've taken out here. First one is going to be the Apollo Go. I got about 19.2 miles of range on that scooter, so we'll see if we can eclipse that. Directly after that, we have the original 9bot Max G2. That there, I got 22 miles of range. We got the Segway ZT3 Pro at 23 miles of range. Got the InMotion Climber at 24 miles. The NIU KQI 300X at 26 miles. The Apollo City Pro, 27 and change on that scooter. The original Ausom, I shouldn't say original, the Ausom Leopard GT1 Pro at 28 miles. I think next up we got the Gallop at 32, the original Leopard at 35, the Punk Rider Pro at 36, and then some pretty crazy performance scooters. We got the Nami Superstellar. I got, I think, 46 miles of range out of that. And then the eMove Cruiser V2, the best performer of them all in terms of range, got 47 miles. So lots of benchmarks to attempt to tackle today. For all of you keeping track, we just crossed the 15-mile mark. We're just over 50% battery remaining. I'm showing 3 out of 5 battery bars. Whenever I do these range tests, there's 2 things that I'm usually after. One, what's the maximum range that we can get with a given, you know, set of conditions? And number 2 is, how does the scooter perform as you drain that battery? You know, what I was mentioning earlier, that first half of the battery is always going to be more performant. And with some scooters, that second half of the battery, you do have some cliffs in performance. And you really won't know that until you go out and take it out on a full range test throughout the entire battery range. Here's those train tracks, just right up and over that, no problem. And so, you know, when you're cruising around, usually once you get to 40% or below, you start seeing some reductions in performance. You know, it'll take longer to get to speed. You won't be able to hit the same top speeds. Once you get below 30% or so, the scooter feels a little more sluggish. And then usually below 20%, below 10%, you know, things get really slow. And below 10%, you're usually in, you know, crawl home mode. As you can see, we're cruising around on hard-packed dirt again. And this scooter is eating up these bumps, no problem at all. Very comfortable ride. Quick update here, we officially crossed the 20-mile mark. Been riding around for about an hour and 31 minutes at this point. Voltage is sitting at around 46, and we've got between 2 and 3 battery bars remaining, kind of dancing around at that point. But we're making pretty good progress. It means we've officially eclipsed the distance that we were able to do on the Apollo Go. Obviously not the same class of scooter, but good comparison nonetheless. So we got a chicken over here. What's up? The next scooter in line is going to be the Ausom Max G2. That one there we got 22 miles on, so we'll see if we can reach that benchmark. I don't think that'll be a problem. We are back riding off the beaten path again. And one thing to mention about these dual motor scooters is that you are going to have better traction than their single motor counterparts, which is always nice, especially if you're riding on, you know, slick surfaces. We're cruising around at about 17 miles an hour on this dirt right now, and I don't have any concerns. Nice and smooth ride. All right, we're going to take a little bit of a detour because I think we're ahead of schedule in terms of range, and I personally have never been down this street. Very nice road surface here. Looks like this was freshly paved not too long ago. We'll ride all the way down here and we will turn it around. I don't know if you can hear the tires or not. They're actually very quiet. You know, on my original Ausom Gallop, you know, the tires were a lot noisier, you know, the hybrid tires that they used on that, and so I had to swap those out with some PMT tires, which are nearly silent. I'm not sure I'll do that with this scooter because the tires that they got on here are actually really quite nice. And another quick update, we just crossed the distance we were able to make on the Ausom Max G2, so 22 miles. Next in line is going to be the Segway ZT3 Pro at 23 miles. We're now well past that 23 mile mark, so we eclipsed what we got on the ZT3 Pro as well as the VMAX VX4. Next in line is going to be the InMotion Climber. We got 24 miles of range on that one. Just in case you are curious, once you get down to that 2 out of 5 battery mark, the battery bar does start blinking, letting you know that you are getting low. We'll see what happens when we get to the very bottom of the battery, what the behavior looks like. Another little update, we just crossed 24 miles, which means we've now exceeded the range that we got on the InMotion Climber. Next scooter on the list is the NIU KQi 300X. We are now kind of teetering between 1 and 2 battery bars remaining. And for all of you wondering, you know, acceleration is a little bit slower at this point. It does take a little bit longer for us to get up to speed. Quick little update, we just crossed the distance we were able to get on the KQi 300X, which means next in line is going to be 27 miles, which is going to be our Apollo City Pro. And then right after that, we've got the DT1 Pro at 28 miles. Nice little path through these water feature areas. All right, so quick update. We got 1 battery bar under load. We have no battery bars. So we are approaching the end of this battery right now. And we'll see, you know, whether that's a kind of a gradual reduction in power to 0 or whether we have a bit of a cliff. Sometimes it's a cliff with scooters, so At least with this test, I'll be able to tell you voltage-wise where that happens. All right, here I'm doing all of this talking. We actually just passed what we were able to get on the Apollo City Pro. That's also a 48-volt scooter with a slightly smaller battery. It's 20 amp hours instead of 20.8 amp hours. Next in line is the DT1 Pro. We got just over 28 miles on that one. We got throttle all the way in. There's definitely a noticeable reduction in acceleration strength. All right, so there you have it. We're well past 28 miles, which means we've been able to exceed the performance on the DT1 Pro. Next in line is the Gallop. I don't remember, I think it was 31 or 32 miles of range we were able to get on that. But we've got the blinking battery bars, so I'm not sure we're gonna hit that today, but we're gonna try. Oh, we've got pretty drastic reduction in acceleration right now. We're about 41.9 volts. Throttle's all the way in. We're only able to maintain about 18 miles an hour. All right, folks, throttle is all the way in. We are in crawl home mode, I think, because 11 miles an hour is what we're able to hit right now. It's dropping 9, 7. Like cut power there for a second. Throttle's all the way in. I think we're speeding up a little bit. That's strange. Yeah, and it's slowing again. So it's definitely throttling us, and now we hit cut power, sped up again. So not only does it give you a blinking indication on the screen, but it also cuts power and allows you to reapply it again. So I'm gonna cut on over here. Let's see what we got. Oh, that's it, folks. It is really throttling the power, slowing us down, speeding up. It'll slow us down again, probably. That's going to be the behavior of this scooter now that we're draining the battery. That is going to be our range test for today. So I'm going to go ahead and download the data, and we'll see how we did. All right, folks, so there you have it. That was our range test on the Ausom L2 Max. On this particular ride, we went 29.65 miles, average moving speed 16.6 miles an hour. We had a top speed of 25.9 miles an hour, elevation gain of 482 feet, and we were cruising around for about 2 hours and 4 minutes today. So as you can see, very respectable performance out of this L2 Max dual motor. In terms of voltage, I'm showing, I think the screen just turned off, but 41.6 volts is basically when everything cuts out for you. So if you're going to be riding around long range, 41.6, at least for me, that's when things cut out. But it came in just behind the original Ausom Gallop and just ahead of the DT1 Pro. But let me know if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns. Happy to address those in the comment section below. If you do want to pick up one of these scooters, I will include a link in the description below, as well as any available coupons. And if you decide to use that link, it absolutely helps support this channel, keeps the wheels moving on future reviews. As always, thank you so much for tuning into Tom's Gadget Garage. We'll see you next time.